It's talking with God. So how do we talk to God? God is very individual for all of us, just as individual as we are. And there is no right or wrong way to talk about God. But I begin with this question. Is your God big enough? Is your God close enough? And is your God you enough? Is your God big enough? Is your God close enough? Is your God you enough? And this is the name of an author named Paul Smith. That's the name of his book. Paul Smith, unfortunately, just passed away in February. So this talk is partially a tribute to him. And that's a magnificent set of questions because it launches us into a framework called the Three Faces of God. The Three Faces of God. And it's based on the work of Ken Wilber, together with Paul Smith writing a book about this concept. So, Jan, if you could show the next slide. So this is the first face of God that I want to talk about. It's really God as we talk about God in the third person, the infinite face of God, God beyond us. And a guiding question, and this is not a test, this is just a guiding question that helps us think about this communication with God. Is your God big enough? Someone texted me during the week, I think it was Juanita, my God is bigger. Do you remember? My God is bigger than this problem, right? And that's a way of thinking about this infinite God. We're talking about God in the third person. And there's something called the Golden Key. Has anybody ever heard of the Golden Key by Emmett Fox? So it's a very short book. And in that book, there's just a very short phrase. You don't have to read the whole book. You can just read this short phrase. And I'm going to read, the author says right on the first page, a paragraph about what the book is really all about in a nutshell. And this goes to this realm of this face of God when we talk about God about us. So Emmett Smith says, all you have to do is this. Stop thinking about the difficulty, whatever it is, and think about God instead. This is the complete rule to this book called The Golden Key. And if you only do this, the trouble, whatever it is, will presently disappear. It makes no difference what kind of trouble it is. It may be a thing, a little thing or a big thing. It may be a health concern, finance concern, a quarrel or an accident, or anything else conceivable. But whatever it is, just stop thinking about it and think about God instead. And that's all you have to do. That's the golden key. So that's a great thing to add to your spiritual practice. One time I remember about 10 years ago, I was in a hospital room waiting for a result, and I was just reading that, and that gave me comfort. Just think about God. So Paul Smith calls this whole concept a God that's big enough for our mind. And I just think, okay, here's an example. The prayer for protection, which I call the light prayer that we say at the end of service. The light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. These are ways that we're invoking God in this realm of the infinite God. We're talking about God. And this God beyond us is it's not a lesser way of relating to God. It's just one of the major ways that we can relate to God. I'm sure there are so many more than what I'm going to talk about today, but these are really important ones to pay attention to because they're very common. But this realm of thinking about God, my God is awesome, right? There's a song called My God is Awesome, right? And I'm doing this because I can see God out there. But this realm could also contain ideas. It contains a lot of useful ideas and a lot of true and perfect ideas, but it contains some ideas that I think are not as productive, such as God is a separate person up in the sky judging us. And how many of you grew up with that image of God? A God a man in the sky, an old man in the sky, an old white man in the sky with a beard, and he's going to judge you at the end and determine whether you go to hell or not, which is another thing that we don't believe in here at Unity. We believe in a loving, unconditionally loving God, more conditional, unconditional love than any mother, father could ever give. So this realm contains ideas that are like that. So it's helpful to explore other realms that are apart from separation. So the next slide is we can talk to God. This is the intimate face of God. This is God beside us. And a guiding question for this realm is your God close enough? Is your God close enough? I remember Wayne Dyer, he used to often quote Meister Eckhart saying, if there's one prayer that you say ever, if there's only one prayer that you say and it's thank you, then that is good enough. Thank you. Thank you, God. And so you're talking directly to God. Jesus used all three of these modes, all three of these realms that I'm going to talk about, but he talked about Father calling the Father Abba, meaning daddy or papa, right? So very intimate. And when I was as young as I can remember, my dad taught me how to pray to God, having this conversation with God. So both of these faces of God that I talk about are also the realm of when we talk to angels. Yeah, angels, just like that cell phone thing. Angels, that was an angel. Saints, we can talk about, in Hinduism, it's the dominant mode of prayer is devotion. And you're singing these beautiful kirtan chants, Om Mani Padme Om, you're singing these things, these mantras that are giving praise to God out there or talking to God in here. So this is the realm of asking for help. Please, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, right? The courage to change the things I can and the wisdom to know the difference. That is talking to God. This week when Jen had her health scare, she had some irregular heartbeats, and the doctors they took this scan. They said, oh yeah, you have an enlarged heart. And so here we were stuck with this information which turned out to be false. But in that moment, I could not go to affirmational prayer like they teach us in New Thought churches. Unity is a New Thought church. I could not go to Jen is whole, perfect, and complete. I am whole, perfect, and complete. I couldn't go there. I had to go to the prayer that I learned as a child. And sometimes that prayer is just getting on your knees and saying, please, God, help. Please, angels, help. And so you're relating to God outside of yourself, but it's such a beautiful way, I think, of asking and recognizing this God in this talking to God phase or face. How many of you feel that when you're most scared that you go back to this, you're talking to God? Yeah. And sometimes, I get on my knees by the bedside still because that's the language that my inner child learned. And that is a language that's still very relevant for how I talk to God. And that's totally okay. Don't let anybody in New Thought ever tell you that, no, there's only one way to pray, and that's affirmations. Don't ever pray as if God is outside of you. So I hope that this conversation opens up and expands the way that we can talk to God. So the advantage of this mode of prayer is it helps us get away from God as a judge. When we're talking to God, it's so much more intimate, and we're connecting to God in this beautiful, loving way. And the Bible does this. The Bible, in the beginning, it's more God, the judging God. And then as it moves through the New Testament and it's the teachings of Jesus, all of a sudden, it's this beautiful, unconditional God. And then soon, by the time you get to the end of the Gospels, it's the way and the light, a very mystical God, a presence that's within you. I want to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, because on the next slide, we have the final face of God, and that is God, when we're at one with God, this first person, the interface of God, God being us, God as us. And the guiding question, not that there's a right or wrong, but a guiding question that helps us explore our relationship with God is your God you enough? Do you feel God when you think about the highest self, the true self that is you? This is the basis of all affirmation. This is the basis of unity prayer. This is the basis of prayer and centers for spiritual living, all new thought. Paul Smith, the author of this book that I was talking about, says, God has a first-person face which is mystical. It's the interface of God, which is called by such names as Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, enlightened self, or divine self. So that's what this is. And I think, when Jesus said, the Father and I are one, this is where he was going. The Father and I are one. And later, Jesus said, I am the way, I am the light. And then later he said, you are the light. So it must be that there is God in all of us. So the face of God, this particular one, like I said, is the basis of unity prayer because it's affirmational prayer. And that key way of doing affirmational prayer is just simply, I am. I am what? I am powerful. I am love. I am joy. I am truth. I am harmony. I am healing in this moment. So you're declaring and you're recognizing that all things that God is, I am. And that is the real power of prayer, remembering our divinity. And so that's really what this whole place is about. All the magic that comes into our lives when we remember our divinity and we forget or choose to not remember fear, not let fear rule us, but let love rule us, because my God is greater than all those things, right? I'm going to read something by Paul Smith that he wrote that really identifies this God as us. He says, to the degree that we lose identification with our ego personality and instead identify with our God self, to that degree we walk and talk like Jesus did, as God, in healing our world. This is what Jesus called losing ourself to save ourself. And Rumi said the same thing. The way to get into the self is to get out of the self, right? So Paul Smith goes on to say, the more we look at the world from this place of deep divine inner light, the more we are manifesting what Jesus was talking about when he made the audacious claim that we are each the light of the world. So this is the interface of God, God being us. This is this idea that is so beautiful and so radical when you think of it. It was radical. They wanted to kill Jesus when Jesus started to talk about this. They said, how dare you intimate that mankind is God? That was not a good idea. It put the power with the people. It was very threatening. And that's another reason why we're here today. It's an offshoot of that whole argument that happened 2,000 years ago. And it's a new way of thinking, relatively in the scale of time. If you think about the religions of the world, Christianity is very, very recent. And we take wisdom from all of these religions. And Christianity had this idea that was so radical and so recent, we have to remember, in the 200 million years of humanity, right? It just happened. So again, there's no right way or wrong way to think of God, but I invite you to think about one of these and try these things on at different times. And don't feel guilty for a second when you think about God outside of yourself. But just remember that all three of these can be true at the same time. God is out there. We say it at the end of every service, the light of God, right? The presence of God watches over us. The power of God protects us. We say that. because it's true. But since we live in a non-dual world, we live in a dual world, excuse me, God is non-dual, all three of these things can be true at the same time. God is within us. God is next to us. God is out here. So I think I had one more inspiring thing to say. Oh, yeah. Beyond all these things, talking about God, talking to God, talking as God, there is this whole world of mysticism, and it's a perfect time to talk about it because it's really the season of magic and mysticism. And think about Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. They discovered their essential teachings, the things that really, really, really made them want to create unity and talk to other people about it, were, for Charles, it was a dream he had about how to heal himself. It was a dream that he had that all he had to do was keep talking about truth statements, keep talking about things that were true about him, his God self. And with Myrtle, it was just an insight from a spiritual talk in Kansas City. It was just an insight that she is a child of God, so how can she inherit sickness? So those mystical ways of being, for some people, for Barbara, it's dance, right? For some of you, it's painting. For some of you, it's drawing. For some of you, it's music, right? And no matter what it is, for some of you, it can be in dreams. It can be talking to angels. Whatever it is, don't apologize for going into the mystic, as Michael's going to sing about in a moment. My favorite Van Morrison song, by the way. Any way that brings you closer to God, just experiment with it. Go there. I'm going to close with a final quote from Paul Smith, who wrote this book, and I just love this quote. This is so powerful. Often called prayer, the we space of God, the we space of God, arises whenever we rest in God's presence in the intimate communion with God's mother-father presence. The presence of Jesus as well and other saints exist in this awakened and subtle mystical state. And he finishes, bless you, he finishes by saying, this non-ordinary state of consciousness is a vibrational field of human energy. This may occur when we gather together in worship, gather together in prayer, to reflect and meditate in community. And this divinely saturated we space is full of spiritual beings, energy fields such as the risen Jesus, God's palpable presence, cosmic images, and vast information fields. So I know that was a lot, but it's clear that this is a man who saw the face of God in such a way that words can barely contain it. And so that's why we have other languages, like the mystic languages, and like music, like Michael's about to sing in a moment. So, actually, Michael, if you could come up. You know, I saw a podcast last night that was all about written language. For those 200 million years that human beings have been around, written language is only just a spot at the end of a few thousand years, right? Written language is what, 5,000 years old, I think? So think about 200 million years of human history, and so much of that was contained in music. They would store information in songs that would contain intelligence, like, don't go down to that river over there, you'll get lost. Stay close to this river here where there's more plants that are edible. I mean, they would actually encode these into songs. But the miracle of music, there's no accident that half of all church services are music. It's because this is how our heart, this is another language, another way we can talk to God. So as Michael, after the platform assistant comes up, as Michael sings anything, just remember it's another way of praying. They say when you sing, you pray twice. And with that, I am complete, and so it is.
What's my hurry in this fury? God is holding me now. Untie the knot in what I am caught in. God is holding me now. Relax my hands and rest my eyes. Take a deep breath and realize that I can do this. I'll get through this. God is holding me now. In this moment, I'll step aside. I will let go and let God provide. Find my center, let love enter. God is holding me now. In this moment, I'll step aside. I will let go and let God provide. Find my center, let love enter. God is holding me now. God is holding me now. God is holding